Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Really excited to launch this fifth Powered by AI conference, thanks to the support of NG and MIT Club of France. And we're really honored for this time to be labeled by the AI Action Summit as on the road to the 2025 AI Action Summit, which is starting tomorrow for a whole week of events related to AI, with the main keynote and the main events happening Monday and Tuesday next week. So there are a lot of events, more than 100 events happening throughout Paris and France over the course of the next few days. And I thought that it would be interesting to discuss some of the items that will be tackled during the AI Summit, but also to put it in context of some of the work we do. So we launched this series of conference a year ago. We had 4 episodes last year, really at the intersection of AI and the energy transition. Both in their own right are incredible communities with their own challenges and issues that people are discussing, working on, developing. But the intersection of both is rather limited in terms of people working on those topics. And even though when we address the intersection of AI and the energy transition, we need to talk about each of these fields independently, like we're going to do today. There's always a link that can be made, both in terms of energy for AI systems, how are data centers needing to have energy to be powered, and that's an increasing concern, but also how AI can support the energy transition through optimization of processes and systems to power that paradigm shift. So we launched this series of conferences in a really, in a way that's really oriented around discussions, around addressing topics, things that we wanted to learn about how to move forward in an industrial setting with AI in a very applied way, and inviting people who can provide this level of insights that's very hands-on through their experiences. So today, we're really happy to have a few invitees that Ludovic will present. But just a quick word, because since a couple of years now with ChatGPT, we have news about AI almost every day. And in the past few weeks, it's been almost increasing in terms of frequency, because the US announced Stargate, big funding for AI initiatives, $500 billion US dollars. And a few days later, a company in China announced DeepSeek, which sort of completely put head over heels the whole system of thinking that you need to invest massive amounts of money to have GPUs and data centers to train AI models. And DeepSeek is a whole different way to train models, but it begs the question of, would DeepSeek be able to perform or to be trained as it is if OpenAI before that didn't exist? So the limited budget they had to train the last model, and more information is coming out on the fact that it's possibly the $5.6 million figure is just for the last run of training the model, but it's not the budget they had for a whole year, for instance. So how does that compare with both training using GPUs that may not be the latest GPUs available, but also using other types of data sources to train the model rather than going to the whole of the internet and parsing and scraping the internet to train these models? So there's a lot of discussions around both the models themselves, the data, and the geopolitics or the governance around these models. So we're trying to launch this panel, trying to address these different topics. And we have an esteemed panel, and Ludovic, you can introduce them.
Yeah, sure, Mir. First of all, I was lucky enough to have the appetizer, because we had a preparation session on Monday late during the night. And it was really one of the best meetings I had since a lot of weeks and a lot of months. It was really inspiring. So I will first introduce Anastasia Stasenko, co-founder at Playas. So if you can just present yourself, Anastasia.
Yes, very quickly. Thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm a CEO at Playas, which is well, a rare occurrence for a woman to be these days and before. So basically, Playas is a French startup training large language models exclusively on open data. Open in the strong sense of this word, basically contents with permissive licenses only. And this objective for us was, of course, we were kind of a little bit rebellious, and we wanted to respond to OpenAI saying for years now that you cannot train performant models on open data only, and they said it couldn't be done. We did it. We did train sort of small language models, so under 3 billion parameters, which are very good at retrieval augmented generation, summarizations, and this kind of tasks. Those are, of course, not generalist models. And basically, what we are doing at Playas now is that we are trying to build compliant with the existing AI Act regulation, GDPR, etc., models, which can be deployed in enterprise within budget and at scale for knowledge management and data processing. And we have worked quite extensively in the open. All our models are open source, but what is more important, I think, is the data work we did. We have published what is called Common Corpus, which is today the biggest corpus of open data suited both for LLM pre-training as well as fine-tuning and retrieval augmented generation use cases, because it consists basically of lots of open governmental data, open science articles, open code, and public domain works, which are actually quite good for multiple things, specifically reinforcement learning, because they do have lots of reasoning traces in them. So yes, and very happy to be here.
Thank you. Our second panelist is Benoît Bergeret, President at Strategy.ai, co-founder and board member at Hub France AI.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here. I spent 20 years in the US, but I still have my French accent. I fought very hard to keep it. I have been doing AI since 1985, 6, and CNNs were already a thing, but we didn't have the compute power to do anything with the theory of them. I am involved in a number of things. I teach AI to company leaderships at multiple business schools. ESSEC here, Tsinghua University Business School, in Morocco at UM6P, and so on. I'm also scientific advisor to a non-profit that deals with education. How do we improve education in France, and how my focus is how do we bring AI to the service of education. I mentioned that because you'll see in what I'm going to say later. I'll mention things about education. Yes, I'm the one of the 3 co-founders of Hub France AI, which is in France one of the important hubs for AI cooperation between corporates, startups, and labs, trying to create a lot of value in the domain.
Thank you, Benoît. And our third panelist is Nicolas Miail, co-founder and CEO at Prismeval and chairman of the board of the Future Society.
Thanks a lot, Ludovic, and thanks me here as well. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So what is Prismeval? We're a Paris-based startup, and what we do is stress testing, red teaming, automatic testing in an adversarial way of any LLM and any agents with a technology which is called behavior elicitation technology. And we're going to release in the next few days for the summit a comparative study that we have run on 41 of the state-of-the-art LLMs using this technology to demonstrate how easy, and it is indeed quite easy, or not so easy, to actually abuse the behavior of the model and elicit unwanted behavior, ranging from the recipe of methamphetamine down to any form of hate speech, or actually synthesizing Salmonella or E. coli, with the objective of enabling those who develop those LLMs to actually understand how easy it is to elicit those behaviors. It is soon going to be a form of standard or regulatory requirement as part of the EU AI Act to have to test these models. And what we're trying to do is enable developers with a tool to do that in what we call their CI/CD, meaning their continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline, in a way that is frictionless, as opposed to having to bring teams of consultants. I have also this hat of the founder and the chair of the board of TFS. What is TFS? It's an independent non-profit think tank that has been working since 2014 on the governance of AI. I think it's even a term I helped coin. I started that at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, upstream MIT, and we have been hard at work since then, working with OECD, with the G20, G7, on both sides of the Atlantic, including on the EUA Act. So I guess you can call me an expert on AI policy and AI governance. As part of my activities, I'm active in the Global Partnership on AI, and at the OECD, where I co-lead this task force on responsible AI strategy for the environment. So I've had to work also on AI and energy and environmental footprints. Great to be here with you.
Thank you. So we are today in NG, so we will start with AI as a strategic asset and energy transition topic. So to start with you, Benoît, drawing from your extensive experience, how do you see AI as a new form of capital, reshaping energy production and consumption, and what implication does this have for global competitiveness?
Thank you. There's a lot to answer to that question. But first, I would like to add something. I'm also part of the OECD network of experts in AI, working in AI futures and in the diffusion of AI in firms. So I'm lucky to have exposure to absolutely brilliant people in these two commissions, informing my own reflection. When I think about modern AI and energy, in the current situation, in really this week, two things come to mind to help understand the situation we're in and the impact on the energy sector. One is something that came in 2015 to 2020 and kind of maybe disappeared, and I think it disappeared because people don't understand how important it is. Data, not AI, data is really a new form of capital. And today most companies are structured around two forms of capital, the human capital and the financial capital, right? Initially it was only the financial capital, then in the 40s, 50s, the notion of human capital arrived. And my strong belief is that we are transitioning to three forms of capital. And you can see that when you observe certain companies that are entirely structured around their data. It impacts their strategy, their processes, it impacts all their policies. But data is more than an asset, that's what I'm saying. And there's clear studied reason for that. Data is non-rivalrous, right? When you use data for one given usage, you can also use the same data for a different usage, even though, or as opposed to a barrel of oil or a euro bill. When it's gone, okay? And so that opens up another characteristics of this form of capital, which is it has exponential value, okay? And that's where AI comes into the play. And I think it's really important to understand that. AI is really important today because it unleashes the value of data as a new form of capital. Okay? Data as a new form of capital is literally unlimited, unlike oil or other resources. Because what is data? Data is information that has been digitized, right? And if you look at what we were digitizing 30 years ago compared to what we digitize today, the gap is already enormous. But if you take a step back, almost philosophical, and say, okay, what is the information that surrounds me here? I call on everybody to try to step out of our formatting of the current applications and understand that, everything you feel on your skin is information that could be used by systems if we were to numerize it. Right? The fact that these projectors are blinding me is information that is not being digitized. But if I had glasses or something, it might be. And there might be some system that would make it less bothersome to have these lights in my eyes, right? And so my bet is that it's a frontier more than a market. It's a it's a frontier that is just opening up in front of us, and it's going to change our lives at least as much as electricity did versus our grandparents' lives. Okay, so that's the first point. The second point, before I go into energy, is and that's more about the very recent events. It feels to me like not enough people avoid the trap of thinking we're in the middle of a geopolitical struggle or fight. We are, but the main driver for what's happening is not public policies. The main driver is economic and innovation driven. You have a very small number of people who are very smart and who want to make progress on these technologies, and a very small number of very smart people who understand the economic value of that and are able to leverage their understanding to raise capital. But this is all private. I haven't seen one government that understands what's really going on. They see what's happening, they understand the value usually, a little bit late, and they try to make it a geopolitical fight because it serves their interest, but also because it's their role. Because if private interests really take a lot of power, then it's going to be a threat to the citizens in one way or another, in one region or the other, and so it's also the role of the government. But fundamentally, it is not a geopolitical battle. Fundamentally, it is a private interests battle. And when we think about what is Europe doing and so on, I like to remind people that to fight the private funding battle that is going on, public funding might not be the right answer. So I'll stop here with these two first considerations.
Maybe if I may rebound on some of the things you mentioned. So the first aspect of data not being fungible is being fungible in the sense that it's not a non-fungible token, right? It's shareable as much as you want to, and I think that's one of the questions we're asking ourselves is how do we leverage both the data that's out there on the internet, which models like OpenAI and all the other even open source models have already leveraged, with data that's currently in organizations that we haven't fully leveraged, as well as individual data, so things in your email, things that are in your head, expertise, etc. That's a huge scope of things that still need to be capitalized, and one of the questions is how do we deal with that amount of data, and how do we put in place a governance that takes into account both open source data, open data, as well as data from industries that either will benefit one particular industry or company or vertical if they share it outside. How maybe you or someone else, how do you think about this combination of open data versus proprietary data?
It's actually a very interesting question because there is such a great focus for model training and actually for specializing models, generative AI models, on the data coming from Common Crawl, from the web archives, from the internet, that as of now, current models are not really adapted at dealing with industrial data. Think about how current large language models are bad at dealing with semantic data, but actually with semantic web. There are so many things to still do with this. And I think that at this point, we are arriving at the maturity of Gen AI technology, let's say intermediate maturity, where we can see that we do not only need generalist models which are based on this very generalist content that you can find in the web archives, and that the organizations, in order to actually leverage their data heritage, their data, and actually still make of this data that they have the competitive advantage, will need to think about training the models for themselves as well. And as of now, everybody was very scared was very much scared by Bloomberg GPT, right? When you remember, it was during the ChatGPT release more or less. Then there was Bloomberg GPT. Basically, they trained a foundation model on their proprietary data, and it worked very bad. And ChatGPT basically outperformed Bloomberg GPT in a couple of months, even less. However, the question that nobody asks is actually, what was this data? This data was just basically the Bloomberg content without any kind of instruction tuning and actually specializing model for the tasks of the financial industry that they were targeting. Of course, at some point, if you only use the model as a kind of a database, a memory repository, yes, the frontier models will do better than you because just of basic scaling of the capacities. However, if we think of the data, and I actually completely join what you were saying, data is a leverage for even further capacities. It's not only, let's say, the memory, the information, but it's also the leverage for creating new capacities. And when you're thinking about like, okay, what can we create, for example, for energy industry, or I have a very specific use case with the blockchain and creating a foundation model for blockchain, you actually need to leverage the data for custom proprietary foundation models, basically transforming the data into new capacities for treating with specific data types. So I do think that we will more and more see this, let's say, division. Okay, you will have this frontier models that can deal with, let's say, most of the use cases, the basic ones, and you will have more and more models, proprietary ones for enterprise, where the specific data will be leveraged to both maintain and augment the competitive advantage that the data holders do have. And just to finish, we were seeing this in the AI Alliance. We are, as players, we are co-leading the Open Trusted Data Initiative in the AI Alliance. And we were seeing this first experiments, for example, in the semiconductors, where basically you actually think it's very specific data types, but they were also willing to actually open source some of the data, some of their data sets and some of the training recipes for their own foundation model. Why? Because they also seen the advantage that you can get from actually creating the industry standard based on this opening of the data and of some of the pre-training frameworks.
I'd just like to rebound on what you said about data being an enabler for new bottom line businesses, actually. Is that when I launched the AI lab at Vinci Autoroute in 2018, we did an artificial vision application to help with toll booth, right? To suppress the toll booths and do on-the-fly paying. And we used for that very early versions of transformers models trained on the mass amount of labeled data that we had about cars and trucks at the toll booth. And that ended up being super successful. Great. AI project, KPI met, great. But then I went to the executive committee of Vinci and I showed them that with that solution, they could open an entirely new line of business for Vinci Autoroute, which is the in-city tolling. Instead of doing like in London, where you have to have a heavy infrastructure for cars to pay to be in London, you could have some very simple things like, simple camera on the pod, like what we had at the toll booth, and basically turn that into a tool to have dynamic pricing for accessing city center. You could also replace all the parking fees, because if you have that, you know how to recognize a car with a great level of confidence, and so you know when the car entered a given zone, when it left, so we know if it was parked or if it was just transiting. And so for them it was like mind-blowing. And they said no, because they said we are financial people, we are not innovators, okay? But as an example to that, I'd like maybe just to come back to the flow of what I was trying to say. Of course, we have a lot of examples of data and AI helping operations, especially in large corporations, and I'm not going to expand onto that. The other side of it, because we're at NG, is what is the future of the needs of AI, especially modern AI. Everybody has heard about the size of the investments. Everybody knows probably in this room that it's not so much the training that costs a lot of money, it's the inference. And so is it safe to invest in energy infrastructure, like Microsoft is taking over the 3 Mile Island power plant to turn it into a data center thing, or Meta is building data centers above the Arctic circles to spend less energy cooling the data center? All these major initiatives. There's one thing that came to our collective attention a couple of weeks ago. It's called Jevons paradox. All these efficiencies that we've seen, not just last week, but last year, like OpenAI reducing by a factor of 90% the cost of training their GPT models, or the mathematical improvement that these lab people who found a way to do a matrix multiplication, which is really the core operation behind everything we're talking about, by 7% at scale. It's a huge efficiency gain, right? So are we going to alleviate the environmental impact globally or not? Most of us think we are not, because gains in efficiencies are going to most likely trigger an increase in usage. And this has been observed in almost every resource-intensive, immature or developing market. This paradox doesn't happen in mature market because the market just cannot expand anymore. But when there's room for market expansion, then usually that's what's happening. So efficiency is actually our friend in the energy sector in many ways.
Thanks, Benoit. One of the the second item you mentioned earlier about the geopolitics of AI, I think is very interesting in light of what's been happening recently. And in some, if you take a higher level view of it, and in some caricatural way, if you look at the American approach of Stargate funding, having almost a brute force approach to solving AI, versus the Chinese or Asian approach, if you could call it that way, which is putting scarce resources, constrained environments, and overshooting what the American innovations have been so far, but leveraging that to develop a model with limited resources. And then the European approach with the AI Action Summit that's happening at the moment, which is high-level discussions on the topic. We're talking a lot about things, maybe developing a little less about the competing models with what should be a competing version of DeepSeek. I mean, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think it summarizes a bit the geopolitical perspective on that. And I'm curious later on to hear about Playas's experience with governments, because you've been working with the French government as well. So I think that ties in nicely with your point. But now to switch gears a little bit on governance and global governance, and especially regulatory challenges in terms of the landscape that we've been seeing, the different models in terms of developing AI technology. How would you think about collaboration versus competition, Nicolas?
Well, number one, there is and there has been a lot of stuff happening on AI governance, in the sense that I think we should celebrate the ability of our institutions to respond to the magnitude and the velocity of the phenomena hitting our societies and disrupting our economies, to put together governance frameworks. Are they perfect? No. And actually, if we were inside of a global governance regime that was perfect, that was something else than a regime complex, meaning a combination of imperfectly designed norms that would combine soft and indeed hard regulatory mechanisms. If it was too perfect, it would be called totalitarianism. And we have to reconcile notions of global governance with the need to respect pluralism. Not all continents and all cultures have the same values, and that's good, and the same political regimes, and that's good. And so, in the way we've seen, for example, the OECD forging a coordination platform to put together pathways to form data-driven or fact-based, evidence-based policymaking to understand actually, what is the carbon footprints of the pre-training of a 375 billion parameter model, which today does not belong to science. It's a question which is unsolved for very good reasons and so few bad reasons. So the way in which we've been able, good governance are evidence-driven. Good governance have to be fact-based. And we're dealing with a phenomenon which is extremely high velocity and high magnitude that too captured in like a storm of epistemic crisis. The civic epistemology, the way in which citizens believe in the way in which their society operates is collapsing. And so we have to deal with something which is hitting us at high speed and over which our society is not easily responding. And I would say that what I'm seeing with the so there were 3 or 4 seasons in the show of AI governance. Season 1 was about building principles. And on that, I think we have a good series of principles, and we have a good, decent amount of global harmonization of these principles. And I think that the landmark Global Digital Compact that has been voted at the last UN General Assembly last September in New York is a good case in point of the ability of over or slightly under 200 nations coming together around a set of principles. And it's taking time. The OECD principles were adopted in 2019. 2024 is when we could translate that as at a more inclusive level. And then it was about moving from principles to practice. And what do we mean by practice? Well, we precisely mean these combinations of as smart as possible cocktails of soft, and indeed hard regulatory mechanisms and their enforcement. If the judges do not have the competence and the understanding over the artifact they are governing, it's not going to be very good. If the professional society, starting with the engineers, do not have the right understanding and convergence over the kind of dominating protocols and the right best practices, it is not going to translate into a standard. And if indeed legislators and administrators cannot converge on the risks and the categorization of the risks and the rights that have to be upheld and the risk managed, it's going to be difficult to create the minimum set of hard regulatory rules and their enforcement through regulatory regime, where actually the executive branch delegates to an independent authority, like for data, the enforcement of regulatory regime, or the internalization within government, like in tax policy, where you've got actual department enforcing the regulation. That kind of series of cocktails have started to emerge. There's been a lot of critiquing around them because it's about reconciling the need for innovation and the need for re-internalizing some of the risk. So it's about this risk management. But I would say that in the span of 3-4 years since the launch of ChatGPT, I've been amazed at the reaction. And I've been amazed at the ability of the international community to cooperate around that. And this AI Action Summit is one more step in that direction, where under the leadership of France, after the leadership of Korea, and the leadership of the UK, a number of countries are coming together to take stock of science, take stock of these cocktails, take stock of how to calibrate them well, take stock of the level of convergence vis-à-vis the need of coexistence, and act upon them. It's probably why our government decided to reframe this AI Safety Summit series into an AI Action series, because we need to solve risk versus access. Our society is going to tolerate the fact that these very potent technologies are captured by 1, 3, 4, or 5 companies? No way. No way. So re-engineering the way in which we ensure access in sharing of these technologies benefit to ensure that people in India or Rwanda or Nigeria are going to be able to develop applications in their cultural environment and mobilize data, and at the same time ensure that the systemic risks that these technology put on societies are managed. This is a complex series of phenomena, and I think that be it at the UN with UNESCO, be it at the level of the OECD with like-minded countries, a lot is happening. Now, a big problem is that the US won't regulate. And so we, the Europeans, are left with a burden far beyond what we should carry. And yet we have the critical mass of the market, just to contradict a little bit the stereotype you're putting. What brings together Europe, US, and China together in having a say in the world of AI? The size of their market, the size of their customer base, and the ability to mobilize large chunks of investment. Now, let's not kid ourselves. The Chinese market is super well integrated. The US market is super well integrated. The European market, aspirationally super well integrated. We are lacking the level of capitalistic firepower that derives from unification of our capital markets. We do not have a system of pension, for example, be it private or public or semi-public, which is one of the issues, by the way, that would actually warrant us mobilizing that capitalistic firepower and taking a share of it towards innovation. That's what Mario Draghi has been saying, and I think it's fully right. So the level of integration is not there, but the willingness of our citizens to not let this flow of American technologies affect our society in a way that is misaligned with our values is there. If you look at the way in which the European Parliament slapped on the floor of the Parliament vis-à-vis US Congress a majority on the UA Act, it's like 75% majority. No one is forcing them to vote. This member of European parliaments, you could say they're disconnected from their customer base, their citizen base. Okay, I don't think that they are that disconnected. Yes, there is lobbying, but not that much. We're talking 70% majority here. So I think that it was responding to the will of the people in having alignment between those values and these technologies, which are overall imported. Now, the question is, how do we make it in a way that this regulation does not hinder Anastasia, myself, and others to actually innovate, to be able to serve our market and export beyond our market. And that is intention. That is clearly intention. And the way in which this cocktail is going to be implemented, the level of intelligence that will go into calibrating the enforcement will be a big question. That's why I'm very happy that as a result of this move, we have a strong European AI office. It would have been catastrophic if we would leave to the countries the implementation. We would have risked fragmenting our market even more. At least we have a body in Brussels that will try to implement as smartly as possible this regulation. The risk is that we confront a bureaucracy and not so much a technocracy, seen in the right sense of the way. Engineers, understanding engineers, and yet having at heart public interest.
If I may...
Yeah, just maybe a word. So, thank you, Nicolas. As I've known you for years, and you're always so, brilliantly clear about these things that can be complex. But there's always one thing that I think is never coming in focus enough, is that regulating AI is useless if usage doesn't pick up. Today, small and medium businesses in the US, 60% are declaring using AI. 14% in Europe, 7% in France. And so what do you do about it? Well, you go beyond regulation and you try to put up incentives. But incentives don't help with the cultural blocks. The only thing that helps is education. And so what I'm calling for and wish to see more of are investments in acculturation to the usage of, more investment into education of people able to integrate AI systems into existing systems in corporations, and high-end, deep experts. It feels like there's that assumption that if we train enough PhDs, then adoption will come. And I think it's missing the point. It's missing the point in Europe, because the culture is not the same. We are risk averse in our companies. I talk with a lot of founders and CEOs of companies, and they want to wait until 5 of their competitors have adopted to feel like, okay, now we need to go. In the US, where I spent 20 years, the first time you see something like ChatGPT, you immediately push it to your organization. So there's a big difference here, and I hope education was more of a focus of policymaking.
Also, the regulation in Europe doesn't come with the incentives. This is one of the issues that I'm personally seeing. It's a huge talk in the startup ecosystem in Europe. Oh my God, the AI Act is destroying us. This is bullshit. I'm sorry to say this. Because actually, and you can see the DeepSeek moment is also so interesting because they trained under constraint. And regulation, which is actually democratically chosen, I'm sorry to say this once again, those parties who voted it, they were democratically chosen. So our regulation is our choice, unless we don't believe in democracy anymore. This is another question. So basically, innovating under constraint is a good type of innovation, and we can do it. However, regulation, specifically when it comes in the very, let's say, immature moment of technology, and specifically of its business deployment by enterprise, it should come with some sort of incentives. And the problem I'm personally seeing is that on one hand, you have public funding, which is completely disconnected from the ways that the regulation is pushed today. And actually, I don't know whether you are seeing this, but even for governance and for compliance checks, there is not enough funding, public funding as of today, though basically AI Act imposed multiple things as test frameworks or education for all the employees which are using AI tools. There are no incentives. And finally, what is even more important, private capital in Europe is completely disconnected from the European market. The issue is that I have met so many funds this last years, and they don't see a market for European solutions. And you could see this with Mistral. Mistral was forced basically to develop product and to develop its business for the US market. They're copying OpenAI, what was OpenAI 6 months ago, and as of today, there is no model builder in Europe, an AI system builder in Europe, which addresses European needs. I'll just give you one example. What is actual today European powerhouse, economic one? It is Poland. As of today, there are no European model providers who have developed models good enough in Polish. The only ones which are good enough and can be deployed are OpenAI and Anthropic. I'm sorry. This is all is said. All is said. There is basically no incentive for both from private capital or public funding to actually develop for Europe, because there is not enough market integration, whatever. I understand all of this. But the problem is that we are actually losing lots of time, which is so precious, because we don't even believe in the things that we do. Like, one hand is doing this, regulation and blah, 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 and the Action Summit is great. And the other hand does the complete opposite. And so this is why we are basically where we are at the risk of losing lots, not even risk, but actually losing our sovereignty, which is now really at stake, because the US governs by chaos. By creating more chaos on the international level of governance, and this is what you're basically also saying, with the US not wanting to, let's say, to align with lots of governance on AI as well. So, I mean, we need to kind of get out of this paradox, I think.
If I may, why I think it's good that we're here tonight. Why Engie has a role to play here? And why did I decide to start the company I started in Europe and in France? For 20 years, we were told that Google, Microsoft was going to gobble Airbus and Engie. Fact of the matter, it's not the case. The dominance of certain domain expertise is a limit to the way in which things integrate. And so, yes, the industry of media has totally been integrated and is being more integrated, but there are some domains which revolve around the mastery of what we call safety and critical function across a number of domains where it is not getting Uberized or integrated. And so I think that the AI that we want for Europe, that I certainly want for my country, for my continents, and that we deserve, is an AI that actually serves these companies. And these companies thrive on the mastery of safety critical. So they deserve AI that is safe, robust, that are actually going to be deployed in their value chains, and for use cases that go beyond basic knowledge management, which is a media function. So basic knowledge management is good. Let's go beyond that. And if we go beyond that, we suddenly stop chasing the Americans on their soil and actually serve our own industry. And the fact of the matter is that so far, I'm unfortunately not seeing that trend naturally. And I saw in the EU AI Act a way to hopefully frame the markets and incentives along those lines by forcing model developers who have the capacity to mobilize the capital to actually develop models that are safer by design, because we know that these big black boxes are not going to be easily robustified simply by fine-tuning. Those guardrails, and you'll see in that study that we released, those guardrails don't really work. And so it's either going to be safer by design if we use this technological cocktail because of the size of these black boxes, or it won't be. And then who is going to lose if it's not? Our industry. Because groups like NG, Airbus, Sanofi, Siemens, Bosch, Stellantis, and the likes are actually the one feeding millions of people. Mistral cannot. That's not the point. We do not want Mistral to have 2 million employees. It's not what preserves the middle class. What preserves the middle class is the industrial world. And we are not too bad at the industrial. Look at Airbus versus Boeing. We're not that bad. So it goes slower, but it goes not too bad. So I think that it's very important for us to articulate the conditions of the market for AI and the strength of AI to serve those industries.
Can I add something? I think there's another aspect that is sometimes overlooked here, is that we all running on the track that Altman and Musk and the others are showing us. But that's not the only track to successful, safe, and useful AI. They are after AGI. They are after AGI because that's how they can raise the most money and drive their valuations up. The thing is, we are smart, and we're starting to understand that you don't need to use a Ferrari to go buy a baguette, right? You can just ride a bike. And most of the AI diffusion in the economy in 5 years, if you ask me, 5 to 10 years, is going to be based on the same technologies, but not necessarily just fine-tuned foundation models. I think there's a lot of room for smaller models, smartly trained on very clean data sets, very relevant, meaning-rich and value-rich data sets, which is not what they're doing. They're doing brute force, so they take just everything and hope the system figures out. And so I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind. It's like the topology of AI systems that are going to serve the economy is not what they want us to believe it's going to be.
But we actually also, I'm just allowing myself one remark. Like 2 days ago, it was even yesterday, actually Meta announced that they won't be signing the Code of Conduct for AI Act. We are part of the working group on Code of Practice, sorry. We are part of the working group on copyright, transparency, and safety for the Code of Practice. So we actually were seeing that actually Meta and OpenAI weren't even interested in doing any kind of lobbying. They won't be signing it, so we should actually stop relying on, for example, Meta for giving us open source models. Like we I must say that even now, for example, in the French government, the models which are used are actually Llama, because those are open source and they're the only ones now state of the art, which are not Chinese, because Chinese, well, this is scary, right? Which are not proprietary models behind APIs, which are on state of the art. Open Mistral is not state of the art anymore. So, I mean, we cannot rely on them anymore, or we actually change our regulation. So this is where we are going now. Meta is not signing. I think others might follow as well. So, I mean, at some point, we actually need to be responsible. And what you were saying, of course, about the smarter ways of doing AI and generative AI, well, for us, it's been something quite evident for multiple months already, but I'm not really seeing any kind of push for this. I insist. We are talking about this here, and every time there's lots of consent, like lots of agreement on this kind of things, but I'm not seeing it in any kind of public sphere, neither in actual investment. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that might hit on another blocking factor here. The ability for European private investors to come together and invest in amounts that are enough to develop these, more safer, more open systems. Nobody has cracked that yet. You take a few Americans around the table, it takes them less than an hour to decide to put 500 billion on the table, okay? The president comes and say, oh, I'll add another 100 billion. He doesn't need to even think about it. In Europe, we don't know how to do that. When is NG gonna put like 1 billion on the table?
we put them on the table but more to build renewable asset or batteries, etc. But we are putting them on the table for different topics. But this discussion for me leads really to your business, Anastasia. You have a huge background in your company on open source. You work with the French government, and your approach is not to compete with Llama on big model, but it's much more to be specialized on a smaller language model. And you have as well in your DNA to be strong on culture, on ethics. So can you tell us what is your vision on following your business and what you see where the small language model can really make the difference?
Yeah, well, so we are basically not building AGI. Yes, that's let's put it this way. We're neither building AGI nor artificial superintelligence. We are building working horses for complex AI systems, where in any case, if we want the systems to be efficient, we need smaller models which are specialized from the pre-training steps to perform and to excel in certain tasks. This is not only the question of basically frugality, energetic frugality, but of the actual efficiency of the whole system and the ways of also observe it and to make it better in an iterative way. So what we have been building at Playas, and we were happy to work with the Ministry of Digital Transformation in France, DINUM and Ministère de la Transformation Publique, to deploy their sovereign AI assistant Albert, is to basically have this under 3 billion parameters model, and actually in our experimentations and what we have developed as of today, found that 1 billion model is actually a very nice sweet spot for all the for the major use cases in enterprise and in agentic systems, which are basically retrieving, transforming information, and actually doing the live AI systems. Because the real problem of when you are talking about AGI, you are thinking of, okay, so the model needs to know everything, okay? And this is a utopia, because the model won't be able to know everything, because actually the information does change, because you change your practices, you change even the laws. For example, in Albert, this AI assistant, the problem that we had is that, okay, you can actually fine-tune a llama. You can actually even continuously pre-train it on French legislation. However, legislation does change quite often, as well as the administrative rules and the knowledge databases that are around it, right? And the ways that you want to transform this information as well. So basically, what we are looking into building is the live AI systems where the models are intended for transformation and where they're used as tools and not the knowledge databases themselves. So we want to discharge basically from, let's say, the models this responsibility to give and to create knowledge, and basically to process the data that we have in enterprise, that we have in administrations, and to see the ground truth always in this data, that the companies, that the administrations, they are the true proprietors. So, and I think it's quite important to really insist on this distinction between seeing a model as a knowledge database and as a tool, because, well, everybody's talking about agentic systems now, whatever that means. I'm still not sure. I haven't seen any kind of agentic systems really working in industry as of now. However, if you really want to be able to trace models' behaviors and to be able to have this observability and some kind of really good guardrails and safeguards, you really need the models to perform specific functions. We were seeing this with function call, and we were seeing this with integration of our models into systems where they were used as LLM as a judge. And actually, this is where you can have more like safer, more robust systems where the models are more stupid. I'm sorry to say this. Stupider models, smaller models, which are only used for specific functions. It's where you also have less hallucinations. You have less erratic behaviors. So this is where we are getting to in terms of vision and the actual use cases that we are deploying as of now.
Could you give us a bit of background on Albert and
Yes, of course. So basically, Albert started as a very simple project. It's a project led by Etalab, and on which we work since June 2023. The idea was that we cannot use OpenAI or Anthropic. Well, the European Commission did, but French government didn't want to actually process the questions from the citizens. Because the use case, which was identified very early, is basically, okay, you have citizens asking multiple questions about different kinds of, about the taxes, about the how to get a passport. You can have like all of these different things. And you don't want to put a chatbot in front of the citizen because you cannot actually ensure that the information that will be given by the chatbot will be accurate. And the responsibility for any kind of false information, of course, falls on the deployer, meaning the administration. So basically what was decided is that, okay, we do need a sovereign system, which will be based on an open source model that can be hosted, that can be deployed on the sovereign cloud or even on premise actually, and which would be used as an assistant to actually help the public servants to write responses to the citizens. So you always have human in the loop, and basically the assistant helps to query the knowledge database and to actually, help public servants to go through all this tremendous amount of information and to formulate the answers which themselves send. And I think that was quite a good way to address things, because, for example, in the UK, they just decided to put an OpenAI chatbot in front of the citizens. That was that led to many quite problematic situations. Or in Austria, they did this as well. And basically, we helped the ministry to first it was fine-tuning, right? Retrieval augmented generation, fine-tuning very simple things, and later going on towards more complex proto-AI systems where you actually have the orchestration of models, with some of the queries being so simple that you can give them to like whatever model, like a very small one, and some of the queries being more complicated, and then they need to be addressed to a bigger, probably more capable model, which can then reason over the situation, etc. And as of now, the real problem for the further deployment is still, the actual regulation which is in place, and no model, as of now, is actually compliant to the EIU Act. So the deployment is still, we don't have enough guardrails, we don't have enough, let's say, security guardrails to be able to deploy this system by, let's say, by all the body of French public servants. But definitely this is something that will be coming, right? But you need to develop more on the security, on the and also on the inference part. As of today, we're still not there in terms of the efficiency of the system.
Yeah, last I heard, I admire Albert. I think it's a brilliant example, especially in the context of Lucy. Everybody's talking about the failure of Lucy, which is not a failure. It just has been opened up to the people too early. It was really a prototype. But Albert is a success because what?
But yes, it was open too early. But at the end of the day, it's
No, sorry.
well known in the
Let me finish on,
yeah,
on
but
Albert.
it's well known in
So
the community that when you
started
release a model, you have to, at least to say, if you're saying you're releasing a model, at least say if it's a base model or an instruct model. And they reveal it was, I mean,
but
they
then
recognize they had a problem with their communication.
they made a mistake in the release. It's not
In
a
the
bad
communication.
project. They made a mistake in the release in communication. Albert, they didn't have that problem. They rolled it out in the France service, les Maisons France service, which is an initiative that came up like 3 years ago. And so with the guichet unique, these people that are supposed to understand everything and answer every question, and they can't. And now it's being rolled in a ministère de la Justice, ministère
Ministère de la Culture.
Académie de Lyon.
Académie de Lyon is another project that we actually led. It's an HR assistant.
Okay.
But basically what's happening is that they created, what was created is the system, which is Albert API. So it's more than just a model. It's really a system with the possibility to run inference for...
It's a product. It's a product.
It's a product, yeah, it's a product. And this is actually another...
It's a big difference.
So bottom line, we can do it right in France.
Yeah, and what you are describing is exactly what we see in NG, and we have the same type of approach. We say it, we have augmented technician, augmented agent. So we are building a solution based on GenAI to help to accelerate the call center, to accelerate to help the technician. And the question for me is, what when do you see a change coming in the approach on GenAI to be able to put the AI in front of the end user? Or in front of, not the end user, in front of the client, because we are in a firm, we are serious, NG is a very serious company, so we cannot put a chatbot in front of the client and the chatbot say, okay, for you, you will not pay anymore your bill because we want to give you a big rebate, etc. So today it's not clear to me, given the robustness of the model, how we train them, etc., by when really we will have a tipping point and the world will change and we will be able to be much more reliable, I would say.
So being in the business of testing every day those models from a robustness perspective, from a safety perspective, few things. Number one, there are models in deployment addressing hundreds of millions of people. This is what OpenAI is capable of doing. They're also capable of doing it because of the terms of use that they put on people and because of the domain that they cover and the domain that they don't cover. So to make that move between like public use, like with the commonsensical simulating functions and an okay mobilization of knowledge, but a high rate of hallucination that people tolerate, to something which is much closer to critical functions and to the risk on brand, finance, and the law, there's significant progress that needs to be made, but that can be made to industrialize. A lot of the things that we're seeing in proof of concepts is basically leveraging the smallest possible models because the cost of inference is there, putting them into pipelines which include retrieved augmented generation, guardrailing, and encapsulating those pipelines into API distribution that is gated, where you don't hand over too many tokens to your users. So that idea of Swiss cheese is actually not so much of a bad idea, but it's taking time to test, like to build your system prompt, to actually qualify your RAG, to actually qualify the pairing of the system prompt with the filters requires, that's why we're into that business, testing, retesting, testing, retesting in the absence of a standard. And that can only be done, I would say, by those who own the domain, by you, not by AWS if you're using AWS, not by Azure, by you. And you need to be able to have on the table a level of testing and other parts, I'll focus on testing because this is what we know about, that is actually able to give you the confidence that, yes, you are rooting out these behaviors. But what we have seen over the past 5 years with this age of innovation, non-industrial innovation, is available on the market benchmarking technologies which were good to measure how well a system performed vis-a-vis a certain type of questions, but that was too static, too easily abused. It's well known that a lot of these testing data sets have leaked into Common Crawl and that are found into the training sets. And so what should be held out as secret to only test the model that is already into the training data set, so it cannot be used as reliable testing methodology. And that's the same across a number of other issues that makes it that today's static benchmarks, what is the problem with these systems? They are not stable. If you send a prompt to a system and you change 3 tokens, 3 words, the quality of the answer is going to change potentially drastically. And so it's now time for technologies which are closer to what we do when we industrially develop systems, which are like, we won't satisfy ourselves with 10 prompts. No, it's 10,000. It has to be dynamic. It has to be adversarially optimized. It has to be speaking to the world of industry. And we are not yet there. And so I see a ceiling here that won't be easy to cross from knowledge management early use cases with RAG to actually more deployments in customer or large chunk of collaborator settings if we don't move towards this like dynamic adversarial optimization and other key elements of the value chain that are the key to unlock the industrial potential. Without that, we're going to see more of Air Canada and Chevrolet, whereby an airline decided to put out in the market a chatbot which was customer-facing and that got easily tricked into selling airline tickets for $1. Or Chevrolet facing the same for cars. And these projects lead into a digital transformation catastrophic outcome, which is total paralysis. The work that you do, then people, oh no, we don't change. Sorry, we cannot. So it's very important to bake at the center of this digital transformation a safety-minded culture that can translate into other gains, in my opinion, which is the ability to have a better control over the persona that you're actually wanting your bot to impersonate. So that, because our customers going to go back to pre-ChatGPT bots? No, because they were a failure. They were shameful. They simply did not work. So how do we actually retain the best from general commonsensical answers and have the same level of robustness when it will require this kind of testing and optimization through fine-tuning and other approaches? There is no way, unfortunately, around that. But if you get there, when you next time you go to the bot of the SNCF to ask for the recipe of the apple pie or methamphetamine, the good bot would actually not give you the answer, but if you ask for the apple pie, it would say, oh, I cannot give you that, but if you want to eat apple, you should go to Rouen or you should go to Normandy. That's, yeah.
Of course.
Can I just give a couple of good examples of actually chatbots? And Albert is one of them. And actually it traces back to actually knowing your data and knowing who your customers are or who your, let's say, end users are. The fact is that when we actually started working on Albert, we took the past interactions between public servants and citizens and we analyzed them. And this is something that was already a revolution. Nobody had done it before. And what you actually see is that more than 85% of citizen queries have been actually, they have already received at least one answer or 2 answers from the public servants. They are the same. They can be, the answers to these queries can be automated. So I don't think that we actually need to rerun models to answer the same questions which have already been answered in, let's say, pre-vetted way. And this is actually what Klarna did. Why Klarna, compared to Air Canada and Chevrolet, was a successful use case, and they communicated in such a brilliant manner, etc., because they actually, most of the questions of the users were classified and categorized by a very small encoder model, and they received an answer which was synthetically generated before. You can have for example, for Albert, in Service Public Plus, which is a DTP service, basically where when you go to the taxes website or whatever, you can leave a feedback or leave a question, and it would go to Service Public Plus. And this is where Albert is deployed. Basically, most of the questions are about the passports. Why does it take so much time to get a passport? Do we really need to redeploy an LLM, whatever, if it's small or big, I don't care. to actually give the same answer. I mean, we do need to probably work better on the conversational quality of the answer, of the pedagogical aspect of it. And I mean, LMs are great for this, for versioning, etc. Because the classic chatbots were very horrible because it all looked robotic. But actually, now we have tools to, to make it like less horrible. But I mean, so. And I really do think that we need to have more pragmatic and also industry-specific and use case-specific approaches to this. And this is why I don't think that OpenAI and the AGI will solve it all. We do need to know our audiences. We need to know our use cases. And I think that like the chatbot for Angie facing a customer could be deployed even now if actually the work of analyzing what people are asking, what are their needs, and this is the first layer of the work to be done. We can deploy safely and in the ways that the chatbot won't do something crazy. And finally, what also DeepSeek showed us, well, I mean, and others before, that actually reinforcement learning with human feedback is not the only way to do things, and that you can start working with reinforcement learning and aligning models in more powerful ways using synthetic data and reward systems. You don't necessarily need to have huge amounts of human annotations if you are able to actually design good reward functions. And this is actually possible not only for math and for code. We have already started at Players actually doing this for administrative and legal domains, where you can actually have knowledge-based and ground truth-based reward system, and this works really well. So I mean, we do have both technological perspectives of deploying such or being able to deploy such assistants, such chatbots, but we also need to be more pragmatic. Sometimes stupider solutions, I was talking before about stupider models, more basic solutions are also good solutions. So let's put AI where it is actually needed.
Yeah, a lot of very interesting topics, and I think we could go on and on. Just a quick few words of threads that emerged from the discussions. I think so. In terms of the reinforcement learning with human feedback, I think having either human in the loop during training stage, it's in some sense it's that, or putting more effort with human in the loop during inference stage, and the effort shifting from one model to another, I think is something that we've been seeing with DeepSeek. But overall, I think the discussion has veered a lot towards around trust. The fact, how do we deal with robustness? How do we deal with closed black box models? How do we deal with open data? The alignment, like you said, Nicola, about between values and the ethics, especially around data licensing, for example, which has been a huge issue and an ongoing issue. So a lot of very interesting threads that are going to be pillars of the discussions during the AI Action Summit, which is coming up. But what has taken place in the past few days is actually the World Economic Forum at Davos. And we're very lucky to have today with us Sean, who is a senior advisor at OECD. Sean, if you can join us, who was at Davos a few days ago, and who can tell us maybe a few words about what the discussions that went on there, and then maybe you can take some questions from the audience for the panels.
Well, thanks so much. It's an honor and intimidating to come after such, I would say, well-informed panelists that also know the private sector as well as the intersection of regulation so well. But I'm happy to just relate some observations that happened in some of the discussions in Davos about a week ago. I was quite happy to have actually spent the first part of January in the Bay Area in San Francisco talking to, I would say, some of the main AI providers as well as the economists that are studying the impact of AI. And in fact, at the American Economic Association meetings, Microsoft played a very pivotal role in helping to organize sessions. They've done a lot of controlled trials of AI deployment, which I think is pretty profound in many ways because they're really quite careful trials. They've deployed them in not just in their own organization, but in major multinationals. It means Copilot is very widely deployed. So with consent, it's quite straightforward to do. But it really emphasized, and I want to come back to just quite a few points that were raised here. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to say anything really new, but I think the fact that it's already being echoed, I would say, at the geopolitical level, and perhaps again later this week and early next week at the state leaders, I think will hopefully this kind of discussion will be powerful. But I mean, already at the beginning of January, we had DeepSeek V3, which I think impressed a lot of people. I went to some hacker houses while I was in San Francisco, and people had already ported it and were running downsampled versions on standalone workstations. So as soon as I heard all this concern about, oh, it's Chinese model, oh, it's it's going to suck up all of our data and it's going to give us distorted views on reality. Well, as soon as we had R1, Perplexity the next day had brought in the open version of it and put it on their server, and you could ask it about the Tiananmen massacre, and you get a much better response than you get from ChatGPT or any of the Google products. So, I mean, we had some internal discussions at the OECD. I don't want to get into details, but suffice it to say that we're not supposed to use the DeepSeek model on the Chinese servers, and that's perfectly fine. But Perplexity is US hosted. They have an open model. It's open weights. It's fully downloadable. It's not sending data to China. It's a freaking equation. And it can be easily estimated, and it works really well. And what's even more interesting is that it's not only open, but it shows its thought process out loud, which is really powerful, because you can actually see, okay, I'm going to collect some information about various perspectives on the events that happened in Tiananmen Square. Okay, there were censorship concerns. It actually addresses them, but in a quite straightforward way, but not in a way that it's self-censoring itself. It's just saying, there's censored data. Here, it talked about the different estimates of the massacres from different sources, the role of the Communist Party, particular players. Anyway, I was quite impressed by this answer. So, and I personally, there's been some discussion. I think I didn't hear it here, so I'm quite happy to be able to quote it. The Sputnik moment, I do think it has a lot of interesting parallels. I'm not sure what the right interpretation is. I do think it clearly has transformed and sent shell shocks across US markets and in Silicon Valley. And for me, the essence of the point here is about the cost function of investment in AI. I think if you go back a year, very well-informed observers that I really admire were saying that the growth of training was going to have to increase exponentially, that we were going to have to go from 100 million to a billion to 10 billion, and that's maybe even up from there. Sam Altman was talking about raising $8 trillion, which we could easily solve climate change for this kind of money. This is very big money, but DeepSeek showed, almost the opposite. It went down at least two orders of magnitude, despite, OpenAI also trained a few times before they got their final model, so I'm not sure if that's, an easy way to explain it. They clearly found some really impressive improvements in performance, both on the training side, but also on the inference side. So their inference cost is incredibly low. Maybe there's another Google model that's close to it, but it's not so clear that it's really on a comparable basis. But the inference cost is spectacularly low. And what I think is also really impressive, and I think it's not exactly the issue, I think fine-trained, smaller models seem to be very powerful in specific domains. But what's also interesting is the DeepSeek model downsampled. So you've got the big model, but then you've also got a 2 billion parameter model that you can run on your iPhone without even access to the cloud. So you preserve privacy, and you have, I think, a lot of other potential applications, and the performance is nearly as good, which is remarkable. So a generally trained model on pretty much crappy data with a lot of reinforcement learning seems to perform incredibly well. And so, it also shows that, what was ChatGPT doing? And I think it's put a huge amount of pressure, and I don't know if you've been noticing, but I think you mentioned, Mir, at the beginning, that I think almost every day this week, OpenAI has released a major new product. And these were probably major new products that they were thinking about charging thousands and thousands of dollars to clients for. But they just released, I think, as of yesterday, Deep Research, which can write a serious academic paper in about 10 minutes. And all you have to do is pay $200 a month. So I've requested access to see whether it would help doing some of the things that we do. But I saw a trade economist try to explain the tariffs in light of modern trade theory, and apparently he's a serious trade theorist, and he thought that it was as good as anything that he's peer-reviewed in the past year. So, and this was 10 minutes, and it produced a theoretical paper with empirics and graphs and LaTeX. Anyway, just really profound stuff. Anyway, I got a little bit sidetracked. Back to Davos a little bit. The geopolitics, and I think we're really at the center. I mean, there was, we had Zelensky, we had Trump, we had a lot of other people that were, I think, talking about things. The Indians were everywhere, and I think they're pretty exciting. I believe they are a co-host of the AI Summit as well, and I'm participating in an event on co-chairs on Tuesday that's going to be co-hosted by the Indians. And I think in some ways the DeepSeek moment is, I think, a breath of fresh air for a country like India, because I think it shows that you don't necessarily need to be at the frontier to be able to have a really profound impact. And I mean, some people have aside from, I would say, security concerns and geopolitical concerns about DeepSeek and the role of the Chinese, I don't think it was not a Chinese enterprise. It was not driven by some central state effort. It was a quant trading firm, a very small one, that had some extra GPUs and some talented people, and they just did it as a side project, essentially, and it got pretty good. I mean, maybe that's a little bit of downplaying it. It became a big project, and but I think it wasn't like it was a government-driven function. I don't think they have major government financing, and I think it was released without any coordination of the Chinese government, to my awareness at least. So I think that also is kind of a interesting moment that we can have, I would say, models coming from left and right. It shows that the playing field, despite it having really converged in a big way in Silicon Valley, the playing field is much more level than we thought. And the fact that the models are being given openly under an MIT license, I think, is very encouraging, because it really means that we're going to see a lot more competition in the future. I could say a few more, but I see you picking up a mic.
Yeah, I think we can.
Let me just say one more word on, use cases in government. I mean, that's kind of the main area that we work on. And we see a lot of interesting applications in healthcare, in education in particular. There was a recent controlled trial that showed that you could catch up on tutoring of 2 years of education and 6 weeks of AI customized learning, which is, this for development is just a massive breakthrough. For energy efficiency, I think there's also similar questions. And if it's really 2 orders of magnitude lower cost and the cost function might be falling, it means that, in fact, we might not actually have explosive needs for energy for AI inference, but we'll see. Questions? Yes.
Yeah, let's open it up to questions from the audience, people who are here.
Raise your hand and I'll bring the mic around if you, yes. I know you.
Since we are here at NG, I was curious on the impact of DeepSeek and what it means for your plans in terms of how you think about new production facilities that at some point were envisioned for big data centers or big AI centers. Has that changed in any way in terms of expectations or forecasts?
The guy who is in charge of data center management had just left 5 minutes ago. But I think today, if we take our role to provide energy to data center, I don't think that it will change a lot. Because as was said by Benoit, if you reduce the marginal cost, then the usage will be amplified a lot. So at the end, what you will not have in training, you will have it in inference anyway. And the trend on data center, even without the AI, was already bullish. So with AI, it's even more. So we have seen recently big projects, hundreds of billions everywhere coming, etc. So for us, we are not providing energy to all of them, etc. But what we see is that we have the hyperscaler. What they want now is to have data center close to the production area, not to belong anymore to a transmission line, etc. They really want that. Building fiber link to go to the data center is cheap. Building transmission line is very complex. I don't think that maybe we will have a bit less data centers, but I don't know. And in each technology, we have always, at the beginning, very greedy technology. It was the same for the grid computing, classical computing. And each year you have new generation. And despite new generation, twice or 4 times more powerful, you had to double the size of your grid computing because you want to do more Monte Carlo, more pricing, etc. So I don't think it will be a huge game changer because for me, the barrier to entry for everybody will be lower, so the usage will be much higher.
Maybe just a quote to add to what you were saying. So it's a quote that comes from Theo Sevgeniu, who was on the panel a few months ago, which is that energy is part of the AI tech stack. And I think it's a really insightful way to put it.
Hi, thank you very much for your passion shared today. You mentioned it, all of you. How do you tackle this adoption aspect and the acculturation Benoit shared, and mainly the impact at short and long term of those technologies going so fast comparing to the way people are adopting them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's going to remain a question after my answer. Because if we knew, I think it would be done already. I've been exploring all aspects of that. I didn't mention one thing, but from 21 to 23, I was full-time at ESSEC in charge of bringing AI into the school, because I wanted to put my hands deep into what it takes to educate people, non-engineering people, to using and joining hybrid teams when they join NGE or something else. And so now at ESSEC, every graduate, every alumni has a mandatory 25 hours course on AI. They do Python, they do R, they look at AI in finance, and they look, of course, at Gen AI. So things like that. Another aspect of this study that I'm trying to do to try to understand and to unlock the key to acculturation and education is I live part-time in a small hamlet in the hills of Burgundy, and I organize every month sessions for the local people on AI. And so I'm exposed to the fracture that there is between them and us. And that's why I'm saying education is key, because I can see how we are all here in a bubble of educated, smart, time to think kind of people. But that is not what makes the 60% adoption that is in the US, right? And so the Conseil National du Numérique launched, I was part of the discussions with Gilles Babinet and others to try to get that off the ground, an initiative called Café IA, which is a nationwide initiative to organize, we love that word, the Café Citoyen, where basically local people who feel they know enough about AI are going to open up forums of discussions to help with this acculturation. But another thing we did, for instance, with Hub Francia, is le PAC IA. I don't know if you heard that. In the first 2 years, I think there was like 300 or 400 PME, small, medium businesses, that were accultured, and that the Hub Francia, together with a couple of other organizations, helped put them up. But the numbers are so small despite all that. People are really exhausted in these initiatives because there's so much to do. And sometimes, there's all the internal, I don't know what's at NG, maybe you can comment on that. But clearly, in cooperation, acculturation and education should be a priority regardless of the plans, because everybody has access to ChatGPT now, and so it's super important to quickly, educate everybody.
A word of a spell of hope. Never let a good revolution go waste. The fact that the ChatGPT revolution hit first where it matters the most, I think is very important. Anyone who works in digital transformation knows that digital transforming national education system is going to be super hard for many good reasons and a few bad reasons. If you compare a classroom right now and an operating theater right now, and if you do the same comparison 50 years ago, well, okay, the classroom pretty much looks like what it was 50 years ago. So, because the rate of change at the core of what a nation-building project factory is, namely a classroom, is hard. And the fact that the way in which ChatGPT revolution hit society started at school is a blessing in disguise. Yes, our teachers and educators, and I work with them, were hit first, like, oh gosh, what will we do? We are going to forbid this. No way. It lasted 3 months. And then they discovered quickly, no, we have to deal with it. And that's very good news, because where it matters the most is where it all began. And we all have kids. I mean, a lot of us do have kids, and we're all facing that situation of actually where it matters the most, having to adopt and actually adopting. And I think it's a blessing in disguise, because if it was more top-down and was not hitting where it matters the most, meaning national education, I'm not talking professional education, not business, national education is actually a blessing in disguise, because it's forcing them to, they have been disrupted already. And that is forcing adoption. If we didn't have this situation, what you were mentioning, Ben, before, which is adoption at the SME level, would be a matter of national emergency. But they are affected now because of ChatGPT. Call it shadow AI. Okay, it's a problem, shadow AI. It's a real problem because of standard, because of risks. But it's also a boon. The people going in the bathroom, like, I need this briefing to do, I don't know what to do. Okay, I'll do it for my boss, whatever. This is also a blessing in disguise, because this is adoption. And this is how SMEs are actually adopting. The one problem I have with that is that that market is most likely going to get, again, captured by the big American firms, Copilot. So how we make it in a way that SMEs have a choice to adopt that is not towards the same is going to be important. And I don't have a good solution to that, frankly speaking.
On this, I did want to mention actually a question. I mean, on this issue of adoption. I mean, those estimates in the U.S. seem very high. I mean, I know the OECD has published ones that were in single digits even for just last year. I mean, I've seen much higher adoption rates, and I know that Microsoft found, well, among programmers, quite a bit, maybe 60% range. But what was shocking to me is that this is in a study where they were trying to push adoption. They only got up to 60%, even in the US, among programmers, where I would say the gains are probably the best demonstrated and should be easiest. And their explanation was they didn't have the incentives in place. So, in fact, the Microsoft programmers couldn't go play more golf. They probably just needed to spend more time on documenting their code and doing boring tasks, and they might have preferred just coding. Anyway, but it is encouraging, I think, to hear your views on that perhaps starting with the youth and getting people really comfortable with it. Because I mean, I've also done master classes in the OECD trying to get my colleagues just to use it. And you ask people, actually we should ask here, who pays for one of the following products? $20 a month for ChatGPT, Claude, or Perplexity. Just raise your hand if you pay for at least one of those. Okay, we do have a kind of selective audience, but I would say that's only half, right? That was, so I mean, and I think if you're not paying, you're probably not a serious user, because you get limited on queries, you use the worst models, you can't use some of the more powerful tools, or you can't provide sufficient context to make the results safe. But anyway, I know there's a question waiting over here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. It has been super insightful. Well, I am an AI fan, non-IT engineering AI fan, and I have a question for Anastasia. So you mentioned question advice. You mentioned that we must know our data and that we must know our clients to make effective deployments. But I have been working in digital transformation for the past 8 years. I look young, but I'm not that young. And I have seen big companies. I'm not gonna give names, but that's how I have learned. And they don't know their clients, and they don't know their data. They think they know it, but they don't. So how can you give us an advice for these targeted companies, big companies who make billions, who works with B2C big clients? And I remember one case in a specific non-NG, massive big company who made an integration in terms of new technologies, an AI integration where they added all of their platforms they had for customer service. Yeah, for customer service. Let's just put an example, integrating Salesforce, HubSpot, just to know if they had new clients beside their big ones that they had. So they added a filter between how much revenue their clients were making and to know if they had new clients based on the revenue they were interested in. And they use a chatbot. We work on a design for that. But what I'm saying is that they found out that they had a huge pool of potential clients, B2B as well, non-global, non-included in the filter that they added, that we will give more revenue to them in terms of sales or consumption than the existing ones. So, but they didn't know that, and they didn't know how to use the data. They were paying thousands in licenses in platforms that were not used by the salespeople, that they didn't even know how to use it. And
what was the question, please?
and
We
the
need
question
to
is,
move on.
what's the advice for these companies who think they know data, but they actually don't know it, or they don't know how to work with it?
I think that, well, behind your question is, I just want to make this observation. I also think that generative AI is actually the new opportunity for digital transformation to finally happen. It's not true that digital transformation, specifically in its core, about the fact of digitizing information and making data the main fuel, the main leverage for creating competitive advantage, that this has happened. It hasn't happened. So I do think that AI, and specifically generative AI, because it offers the obvious possibilities to work with unstructured data where we have nothing. We don't have ETL for unstructured data. We do not have data lakes, good data lakes for unstructured data. Yes, because data lakes are always kind of, yeah. We don't have this. So I do think that there is an opportunity. However, and this is actually why, as of today, the companies which make most money from generative AI are consulting firms, such as McKinsey, Accenture, etc. Explaining this is actually doing lots of organizational, political, and change management work at organizations. And I do think that, well, basically, as of now, it could go probably faster, but there is so much to do. Because companies think that they know their data, they don't, or they don't know what the actual, let's say, competitive advantages and what value can be generated from creating the real data heritage, etc. So all of this is still to be done, and just basically developing the tech stack won't be enough. And this is what I have been seeing in terms of, let's say, quite low adoption of AI behind POCs. Because as of today, if you look, for example, at recent Gartner research, more than 80% of Gen AI POCs don't lead anywhere. And this is because actually the change management and the organizational side of AI doesn't follow the technological advancement. You can have whatever good tools, but if you don't have the framework which comes with this, and when I'm talking about organizational framework, it's also actually about the integrations and about the interfaces. What we also only now have as of now is AI as a chatbot. This is not where most of value is to be done in the organizations. I'm sorry. There's so much work to do. So just to answer your question, I hope that there is an opportunity. I don't have an exact answer, and I'm not sure that lots of economic actors and industries do have one. So let's work on it. It's exciting.
One way to look at it is if anybody in the room wants to start a new unicorn, just focus it on exactly the problem you're raising. Management framework for data that small and medium businesses can just adopt, understand. It's a complex topic and a big opportunity.
So on this, let's end this part of the conference. Thank you very much to the speakers, all of you. Thank you. And so we'll end the streaming part of the conference. Thanks a lot for joining. For those of you who are online, we were really lucky this time to have almost 400 registrations, both online and in person. So that's exceptional. For those of you who are lucky to be in person at NG in La Défense, we welcome you to move on to the cocktail reception where we can continue these discussions in smaller groups and in person. Thank you. And if you are interested in the conference series, flash this QR code to sign up to be on the mailing list, but also to give us your feedback on today's session. Thank you very much.